If you work in radio communications, in advanced radio communications like for 6G, then you probably have heard about cell-free networks. You may even have cited papers that say that cell-free networks are a good idea, or you extended the idea of cell-free networks yourself. So today I'd like to go back in history. Where did the idea come from? How old is the idea of a cell-free network where the location of the cells, the coverage area that is served by an access point or by a base station, is not defined by where the towers are, but it's where you are with your smartphone? Well, I like to take you back to 1994, and I proudly mention this paper. Remember 1994? We just had the idea of cellular systems coming up. There was a desire that you could make telephone calls while you're on the move, but there wasn't spectrum available for that. The broadcasters knew how to transmit from radio towers, and they were putting these towers on the mountains to have a huge coverage area. But if you would use that coverage area just for one phone call, it would not work. There would not be spectrum available for it. And the big breakthrough at those days was the invention of the cellular frequency reuse. You use frequency in a small area, and if it is shielded off in the right way and the signals do not propagate too far, for instance by having lower towers, then you could reuse the same frequency at other locations. And more or less in a cellular grid, frequencies were being reused. A technical concept that even became so popular that people called the mobile phones a cell phone because of that cellular reuse pattern. And as an extension of some of the projects that we were doing in Berkeley, the InfoPad project for wireless multimedia, we were thinking about data communication, web browsing, instead of just making telephone calls. Early 90s that was. And in 1994 I published a paper at the Vehicular Technology Conference in Stockholm talking about a new cellular architecture, and we call that the virtual cell network. What does it do? Well, instead of defining a coverage area around an access point, we said, why don't we want to cover the area near the user, so the access points, the cell towers, cooperate to define the space of that cell just around all the client stations. So it's a fluid idea of where the cell boundaries are. And that's exactly what is drawn in figure 1 of that paper from 1994. We have the client stations with small print A, B, C, D, A, B, C, but the cell area is centered around them, and the cell area is not rigorously centered around the access point. It's fluid. And in 1994 we called that a virtual cellular network. Worked together with Wajong Kim from Korea. He did most of the work on what the network should do to support it. And the idea of having the fluid cell structure was something that I proudly present as my idea from the extension of the InfoPad project. But then let me explain why at that time we called it a virtual cellular network. Early 90s we had discussions about what is virtual and what is the opposite of virtual. Interestingly, my friends told me the opposite of virtual is transparent. In a transparent implementation, you don't see the implementation. And it is there. In a virtual system, it is not there in reality, but you experience it. You get a service of that virtual thing. So a virtual cell system basically creates that cellular experience, the reuse of frequencies, but the definition of the cells is not as the surrounding areas of base station, but the area near where you are. And that's why the word virtual cellular network was chosen in 1994, although these days virtual cellular networks is a name that is hijacked for something that you do at a network level, where different operators provide virtually the cellular service. So feel free to continue to call this a cell-free network, but I would also like to encourage you to be aware of 1994, where the first results have been presented. 1994, Stockholm VTC conference is a long time ago, so I like to take you to what does that has as consequences for networks nowadays. I personally work on communication with light. But anyhow, also the radio community goes to higher and higher frequencies. These radio signals and light signals propagate via a line of sight. And the amount of radio energy that comes in via reflections is less and less with these pencil beams targeted towards the users. But if you block that beam, then the communication is gone. So it is more and more important that signals come in from multiple directions. Massive MIMO is even the solutions where we go towards. So the whole idea of using that is getting increasingly relevant and particularly fits optical communication systems. Let's say in an indoor space, like where I am right now, we can have multiple access points, each emitting light, and they can cover the area where I'm interested in, where I'm holding my mobile device. And therefore that cell-free system with fluid cells is particularly suited for large coverage areas, also for wireless optical communication. All right, in 1994 we called it a virtual cellular network at the Vehicular Technology Conference in Stockholm. This year VTC Spring is in Oslo. If you want to see me there, then feel free to contact me and we can have a chat about topics like this or optical wireless communication.